I'm going to share a bit about my own experience with grief as a small child who lost her father, and I'll talk a little bit about just a professional situation dealing with grief, although not as explosive or nearly as funny as the one that was in the anger video. So I was approached, and this was maybe 10 years ago, to possibly do a documentary about grief, about widowhood specifically. And it was a woman who had lost her husband when she was perhaps in her 50s, and they were very much soulmates, inseparable. They had built a professional life together. He had passed suddenly from just a heart condition that could have been treatable if it was ever caught. All of a sudden she's without him. And she said one of the things no one ever talks about with grief is the anger that remains. The anger that you have to go on without them. The anger that there's new moments, new memories. Like they had children, and so all of those milestones with their children growing up and getting married and having kids of their own, she went through that on her own. And she said she had been to widows support groups, and this had sort of inspired her to want to make this film, because it is so taboo to express that anger, right? Because this is the beloved who's gone, and how can you be angry at them? It seems disrespectful to their memory. But for you, the anger is very valid. To have that resentment, to have that disappointment, to have that frustration, that, where were you when I had to go through all the rest? And to be able to just acknowledge that and express it and bring it into the domain of conversation about grief. I was interested in potentially doing a project about grief for the long haul that matched my own experience of grief for my father, as a sort of lifelong thing that goes through different developmental stages. And there are many things when you experience grief as a child that you're just not allowed to express for convenience. And it sort of matched up with this woman's experience of being the devoted widow, right, who could never express that those feelings of anger or frustration, because it was always, she was carrying on his memory as a wonderful person. And how can you be angry at this wonderful person? Unfortunately, the project never went anywhere. It wasn't in developmental stages. It was just in idea stages. But as far as funding and other steps, it just didn't happen. To give a bit of context for my own story of grief, so I was a very creative child from a very, very early age, and so I was acting and going to auditions from the age of 3 years old. And in terms of like writing and drawing, all of that happened quite early. I was taking professional artistic commissions from the age of 14. At the age of about 16, 17, I was directing plays and writing them and performing, and I had been accepted to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London, in addition to a couple other drama courses. It didn't end up happening because of lack of funding, but to give you an idea of how active my creative life was early, hopefully that's a decent illustration there. So I never felt that growing up with grief blocked my creative expression in that way. It can do for some people. I have very early memories, so I do remember I was maybe 18 months old, thereabouts, when my father suddenly ended up in a hospital with advanced cancer that hadn't been diagnosed, and the only reason it was found was he had heart troubles. And I remember being in the hospital room, held by my mother with all of my grown-up siblings around the bed, and my father in the bed hooked up to all the tubes and monitors and paraphernalia. I do remember looking out the window and seeing a graveyard with a distinctive sort of wrought iron fencing around it, and these sort of rolling hills covered in gravestones. And I heard very much later in life that that cemetery was not near that hospital, but it is the cemetery where his ashes are buried. At that age, your memories, your thoughts are more visual and emotional, much less sort of intellectual thoughts, thinking in language. So I understood that it was goodbye, and I wasn't taken to the funeral or any memorial service. I was taken to one of my brother's houses, who had the urn where his ashes were, and I was shown that and told that, you know, that's where your father is now. He's basically not coming back. Although my mother had degrees in child psychology and knew all the therapy speak, she very much was counting on the fact that I would not remember it and that I would not remember him. At the point that he died, they were in the middle of a very contentious divorce and custody battle. And my father was a man with big, dramatic emotions. He was not an easy person. To provide a little context, so my family is dysfunctional, and not just the, oh, we're kind of quirky kind of dysfunctional. You had to intuit what was safe and all of those things. It was fairly ridiculous. So my father was a demonstrative person, affectionate, and no one else in my family was like that. How do I say this? Oh my goodness. So I've gone back and read through my baby book entries, and one of the things that my mother seems appalled at from an early age was that I sometimes, just businesslike, called her by her first name as a baby. Just like, hello Maureen, not mommy or anything like that. And but with my father, I was just very effusive and expressive back to him, and I always called him Da, just from the second I saw him. But I can tell in the baby book there's a definite competitive edge there, with my mother wanting to be my favorite, and she apparently was not. But it sounds to me as though I was just mirroring both of their approaches to me. If my father was all in with, you know, I love yous, then I was responding to that. And if my mother was very much like, here's another baby I have to take care of, because she had raised all of her younger siblings, then I was apparently giving that back to her. Like, oh, here's this woman who has to take care of me. So, yeah, we managed to be friends. So the form that my grief took initially was that as maybe about 2 years old, right, so whenever my mother would go shopping, I was left to just roam on my own. And this would have been maybe 1979. And I'm not saying I agree with the parenting style, but that was just the thing. You just let your baby wander off and hoped for the best, and either they develop the survival skills to live in this world, or you know, they don't make it. I don't know what the philosophy was there. But anyway, she'd be off, you know, in like the grocery store and some other aisle, and I would be wondering, and what I couldn't bear. And I recorded an earlier version of this video where I started crying when I got to this point. And so if you're wondering why I'm dry-eyed now, it's because I kind of already had that emotional release there. And so basically what I couldn't bear about losing my father was that person who greeted me with joy, who was just 100%, I love you. every time he saw me. So I would just wander up and down the aisles looking for a man on his own, and I would plan this. I would sort of plot, and I would be like, oh, that's a man on his own. Okay, I'll keep walking, and maybe, you know, go all the way down the aisle, come back again and pass and see if he was still on his own. And if he was, I would shout, "Daddy!" and just run to him and throw my arms around his legs. And because I needed that, you know, like where does the love go when the person is gone? I didn't know what to do with that love, and I had to just do that with someone. And of course, you know, every man was just like, oh my god, this kid is not mine, it's not mine. And they would just back away. And my mother caught me a couple times, and she was just, you know, very blasé, just whatever. And until like, so one day I had spotted a man who, he was all in denim, and this was, you know, like I said, you know, late 70s, and had this long sort of brown curly hair and this Jesus beard and blue eyes, and he looked like my older brother, who resembles the most my father as a young man. So this wasn't completely random on my part, but I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to run up to him and call him daddy and all that. So I plotted, I waited, and I did, and he thought that was funny. He laughed, and my mother sort of like came into the aisle, probably hearing me shout, "That's my daughter again, grabbing a random man." So she just picked me up and put me in the cart, and she was like, "Sorry, she always does that." And he said, "Well, why did she always do that?" And this was the nicest man ever, right? And she said, "Well, she just lost her father, and she was just gonna, you know, go away off to the next the frozen foods aisle or something." And he says, "Well," he said to me, "I'm sorry you lost your father." And he's the only person who ever said that to me. And he went on to say to my mother, you know, you can't just let her do that. Eventually she's going to run up to a man who's married or who has kids with him, and that will be really traumatizing for them. At least very uncomfortable, but definitely not good for anyone. And he said, you need to have a talk to her, and you need to listen to her. And he was like, I'm a single guy, I don't mind. I thought it was funny, but next man might not find it funny, and then what? So, and the thing about my mother is you could not ever criticize her. She, either floods of tears for being criticized or just rage. And so she wheeled me off into the next aisle and told me, look, your father's dead, he's never coming back. The early message that I got with her rage at me expressing my grief, you know, at 2 years old, and needing to express my joy at seeing someone, needing to say daddy again, needing to have that continued relationship. And for her that was taboo. She didn't want that, you know, and so I learned early to minimize my grief, to make that go underground. And if I was going to say any prayers for him, I did that in private, you know, I never let her know about it. And so it never felt safe to express that through creativity either, because, you know, if I had written a poem or a story or a painting or whatever it was, anything to do with him, she would have disapproved of it. It would have disappeared. So the sense of having ownership over my own grief wasn't really there, and that wasn't something that developed in a healthy way. And in my 20s I did all the shit you're not supposed to do when you're grieving. So I won't go into that, but all the bad self-destructive behaviors, you know, I've been there, done that, as a way of running away from the grief and running away from the sorrow, because, you know, a lot of that had just gone underground to the point where I didn't really understand the source of it. You know, the source of my own sadness, missing a father that I wasn't even allowed to talk about. So it seems strange that having so many creative outlets, I just couldn't let the grief out in that way. I will say I do get creative inspiration through my dreams quite a lot, and it was a series of dreams that had allowed me to see him in a new light, starting in my 30s, and that helped tremendously. Because, you know, again, as just my own personal private experience, you know, it wasn't going to be observed. I didn't have to share those with anyone, but it helped me. Those helped me a lot, and whether you want to call that a visitation or just, you know, your own subconscious mind bringing up these new ideas, new perspectives, you know, either way, the effect is the same. You know, it opened the door for me to have this kind of healing and to reclaim a really lost part of myself.